there, this is Becca DeYoung, Canadian Artist Down Under, and today I'm going to paint a Christmas scene. I figured seeing it's the week before Christmas, it would be nice to do a quick, fun, easy tutorial. This is one I did last year, and when I did it, I used watercolors as well as oil pastels and a little bit of glitter. This year I'm going to do it just with watercolors. I know some of you don't have oil pastels, so I'm going to do it just with that, and we're just going to see the results. I hit a sale at one of the reject shops here in Rockingham. So I'm gonna try this paper. I don't know how well it's gonna work. It says it's 300 GSM rough. So I'm gonna try it. I'm just gonna see if I'm happy with it or not. It was a good deal, so we'll see whether or not it was worth the money. One side of the paper is a lot rougher than the other, so I've decided to use the rougher side, but I mean, that's your own personal preference. Today, instead of taping down on a normal MDF board, I'm using what is called core flute. This is wonderful stuff because it's super, super light, but very sturdy. So you can see it's just a couple centimeters thick. I use this whenever I'm doing any work outside. So when I do my On Plein Air series that I will be doing through Mug and Brush in the new year, we'll be using these instead of MDF boards just because they're easier to carry around. So if you are using A4 size paper in Australia, that would be close to 8.5 and 11 inch paper in Canada. What you need to do is you need to tape on the long side, you need to tape 2 centimeters off. That way you'll end up with an 8 by 10 size, but you want to make sure that on the smaller sides, you're just taping a few millimeters. Otherwise, it's not going to fit properly in the frame. The colors that I'm using today are phthalo blue, sap green, and alizarin crimson. And I might use a little bit of lemon yellow. I'm not quite sure about that. We'll have to wait and see. So if you have a nice palette like this, they're really wonderful because you can squeeze your tube into one spot in each of the sections. Then when you add the water, it doesn't actually mix in with the part that the thick part of the paint that you just put in there. That way I always have a reserve of the color, and then as I'm using the color, I just mix it into the water below. It's a nice way to almost like using a pan without having to waste any of your paint, because the nice thing with watercolors, as you know, is that once they dry out, you can just reuse them. It's not like acrylics where these get wasted. So in this painting today, the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna develop the sky. So I need to use a very large brush. Now, I know people often ask what the sizes are. This is a size 8, but that doesn't really help because each brand has their own unique sizing. So if you take a look, this other brand, this is a much smaller brush and it's a size 10. So it's not really useful for me to tell you, go out and use your size 8. What I would say is this is about 1.5 centimeters long and it's less than maybe half a centimeter wide. So that might help you a little bit more as far as trying to find the right size brush, but whatever. Okay, so what I'm gonna do to start is I'm just gonna wet more than the area that's gonna be my sky. Now truly, in this painting here, I have sky that is 2/3. So from the top down 2/3, and then I have complete ground for the bottom third, but my mountains and my treetops are obviously going to go into the sky area. So it's always best to wet way more area than you plan on. That way you're not going to end up with any hard lines where any of your colors stop. Okay, so I'm just going to take a little bit of that phthalo blue and I'm just going to start doing some circles across like that. And I'm gonna just add in a little bit there and a little bit there, and we're just gonna let that run. We're just gonna let that see what it's gonna do. Now, in my palette, I'm gonna mix a little bit of my alizarin with a little bit of phthalo to make a nice purple. Then I'm just going to sorry, I want you to be able to see what I'm doing. So I've made a purple there, and make sure you have a test sheet so you can test your work to make sure you're happy with that purple. No, I'm not quite happy with that. I want it a little bit pinker. There we go. Okay, so now I'm going to also put in just a few purple lines in there, and I'm going to drop a little bit of the purple. And like that. Now this is a wonderful painting to do when you're supposed to be doing your housework, because we're going to need to do a wet on wet area and then let it dry, and then do a wet on wet area and then let it dry. So there's nothing I can do right now. Actually, I'm going to play just a little bit. I'm just going to add a little bit of alizarin in there too. Might be too much. I might not like that after a while, but I'm just going to let that go. Just going to see what it's going to do. And now that I've put in that part in the middle, I'm going to just dab a little bit, not too much. I'm just trying to soften a little bit of the lines, but because this is wet on wet work, it's really going to soften, and none of these fine lines are going to be that obvious afterwards if the paper's good. If the paper is not good, not as good quality as I'm hoping it is, then the paints won't be able to move as much, and we'll end up having much more, these round shapes will end up being much more obvious. So I'm just going to let this dry. I'm not going to use a blow dryer on it. I know that's the nice cheat that I often use because I'm an impatient person, but I'm actually going to let this dry and just see how it goes, and then we'll move on from there. So the first layer is dried, and I'm just going to wet the whole area again, and I'm going to do a second layer on top. Now the paints didn't move as much as I was hoping they would, and that just goes to show that this paper isn't quite as high quality as I was hoping. But you know what, if you're just playing around, if you're just trying some techniques, if this is just your art journal, then by all means don't worry about using the absolute best papers that you can buy. Plus, if you know for a fact that you're not using the best quality paper, your expectations are already a lot lower, and you'll be more free to experiment. You'll be less worried about wrecking your work or being unhappy with the result. And usually when we let go of our expectations, we actually end up making better art. So I highly recommend trying some either inexpensive paper to just muck around with, and then you're not worried about wasting money either, because the paper wasn't as nice as what you would use if it was, you know, something that you had planned on giving away as a gift or for someone else. So I think that's gonna add some nice layering in there. And now I have wet the whole thing, but I can tell already that this paper is starting to dry. If you're not sure how much you've wet, a really nice easy way to do, to check, is just to stand up and just look at it from a different angle, because oftentimes the light reflects off the paper and you'll be able to see shiny spots where it's wet, and you'll be able to see, like right there, there was a non-shiny spot, so I knew that I had missed a spot there. Okay, so I'm going to do the mountains, but I can't really do that until it dries. And I want to leave the trees also to wait until it's dry. So I'm just going to work a little bit on the bottom. Now, one of the other colors I have here is sap green. And I don't want just sap green in there. I also want a few different shades. So I'm going to mix a little bit of phthalo blue in with the sap green, just to give a different green color in there as well. Oh, that's nice. Good. And I'm just going to let that wick up. Now, the nice thing about having your work on an angle is that you can very easily control the direction of the wicking. Now, you can't totally control it with watercolors, but you can at least control it a little bit. So because I have the top of my desk at a higher angle, I've just turned my board around so it'll wick in this direction a little bit more. And I don't want a hard line, which is why it's important to do this step as wet on wet. And I'm just going to let that dry. That's all dry now, so I am going to work on my mountains, and I'm just going to use the alizarin crimson for that. So testing it, I want it quite bright, and so I'm just going to kind of go like that. Now you have to work quickly, because if this dries, you're going to have permanent lines. So you do have to do this part fairly fast. And if you're finding that your paper is absorbing it way too quickly and you're getting hard lines, I would suggest just doing like one side of the mountain, work on that area, then move on to the next one. So now I'm just adding water, just plain water. I'm not adding any more paint, and that's going to flow down nicely. And I'm going to put my Oh Holy Night right there, so I'm not quite as worried about having a straight line there. And then I just kind of want my mountains to just go off in this direction. So I'm going to add paint on my brush, and a little bit of water, more paint on my brush. I'm just dipping into the paint and rubbing that same area over and over and over again. Now that I have quite a bit of paint on my paper, now I cleaned my brush, so now I only have water on my brush. And I'm just gonna let that flow down. And I might have to add some more purple in there after, but I'm not gonna worry about that right now. Okay, so that area, first layer of that area is done. Excuse me. I just bumped the table. Now my sky. I am happy with my sky, but I want it more vibrant. I'm all about bright colors. I think you should either go bright or go home. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna dab using my brush in different directions. This is the phthalo blue. Clean my brush, and now I'm just dabbing wet water, just water over top, just so all those dabs I made aren't so defined. Now you could do this another way. You could wet the paper first and then wet and then put the paint on it, but I don't want to do that. So I'm just gonna dab in a couple different directions. Fairly thick phthalo blue there. And now clean my brush. So now there's only water in my brush, and I'm just gonna touch those spots so they're not quite as defined. And I need to bring some into these other areas, otherwise it'll look kind of weird that there's this bright blue in the sky and then no blue. Okay, that's going to be lovely, lovely, lovely. Now the reason why I don't want to spend too much time developing these mountains yet is because I'm going to paint my trees over top. The only reason why I can paint over top is because I'm going to paint a darker color over top. However, I am using sap green on top of the alizarin crimson, so I am going to get some brown as a result of that. So we'll just see how it goes. Hopefully our Christmas trees don't look like they're dead. Now, once again, I have to let this dry and not play with it too much. But while I'm letting that dry, I am going to brighten this area. Some of those lines that I made earlier, you can still see they're quite defined, but quite a few of them have just blended into each other, which is what I wanted. I'm using the same brush, just testing the alizarin crimson, and I'm gonna just do a few more lines like that. Then I'm gonna clean my brush. So now there's only water on my brush. And I'm just gonna touch those lines that I made just so they bleed towards the center. Now, I did 3 at once, which, if you want, it might be better just to do one line and soften it, and then dip your paint in the paintbrush, do the second line and soften it, if you find that your paper is drying too quickly. So if you're unhappy with how your paper's working, because it's a cheaper paper and dries so fast, I would suggest just doing one line at a time. Now I am gonna add a little bit of blue in there, just a bit, and soften. Oh yeah, that's lovely. Okay, I'm not gonna play with it anymore. I don't want to darken too many of those areas because I do want to bring back the white. I've lost all my white in there, which is what happens when you do wet on wet, but I am going to put some white in the end. So once again, I need to just let this dry. Next is the trees, and I'm going to use sap green for the trees. I'm also going to make a darker green mixing the sap green and the phthalo blue, but I'm not going to do that on my palette. I'm actually going to do it right on my paper. So I'm just making sure that I've got the right amount of green, and I'm still using the same brush. I haven't switched brushes at all. Now, you don't want your trees in the center. You need to think about the rule of thirds. So you want the main focal point of your painting to be either where the crisscross lines, the tic-tac-toe lines, or if you're in Australia, it's called knots and crosses. That's such a funny name, knots and crosses. So anyway, think about where those lines would intersect. That's where you're gonna have your focal point. So I'm gonna stick one tree right here, and I'm not thinking about shape very much. Just making sure I have enough paint that it's fairly watery, and I'm just doing crazy zigzags back and forth. Now I'm gonna see my mountain behind that, and I'm totally okay with that. That's fine. We're gonna do quite a few layers here, so we might end up not seeing very much of the mountain, and this is just part of the process. I'm using watercolors, so I know that everything I've already put on the paper is gonna shine through a little bit, because watercolors are translucent, transparent. So I'm not going to be able to get a super dark tree over top of this unless I mix some darker colors. So now I'm going to, okay, I changed my mind. I am doing it in my palette and not on my paper. This is very blue, so I'm just mixing more and more green in there. And that's nice. Okay, so now I'm just going to do a few more ziggies, zigzags. Oh yeah, there we go. Now that's quite light, so I will have to do some more layers, but that's all right, that's the beginning. Now underneath the trees, it's obviously gonna be a little bit darker. So I'm just using that same bluey green that I just mixed. I'm gonna add a little water to my brush, and I'm not thinking about this too much. I'm just really playing, just having some fun. Now, I don't want just two. Two is an even number. And it's always good to have your work in groups of threes, odd numbers. So 1, 3, 5. So I'm gonna put another tree, just a little tiny baby Christmas tree, a Charlie Brown Christmas tree in here. There's my Charlie Brown tree. Now, I like it. I like it. It's getting there. It's coming along. I'm going to let this dry, and then I'm going to figure out how I'm going to make it darker so we don't see as much of the mountain behind. This is dry now, and I've decided that I do want to go over the trees with a darker green. So what I've chosen here is hooker green, and I know that the rule is that you shouldn't add more than 3 colors, start with 3 colors in your painting. So really I'm breaking the rules, but that's what artistic license is about. You know what the rules are. Picasso said, know the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist. And truly, it's a really good idea to study color theory, to know those things, and then choose to break them when you want to. And if you're unhappy with the results, you'll be able to go, right, okay, so I know that this is why that happened. So I'm not going over the entire tree. I'm just doing a few zigzags. Oh, that's nice. Just a few in there, just to add a little depth to it. But I'm gonna do this sparingly because we can always add more. You can't take away. And I don't want to cover up all of the beautiful sap green I have in there, because that's what really makes these trees so pretty. Oh, there's a happy accident. That's just gonna add to everything, so I'm not gonna worry about that. Good. So now that I've added that in there, I'm gonna go back to my phthalo blue sap green mixture and just add a little bit more. Not too much, I'm just highlighting a little bit. We are almost done here, folks. Next is we're gonna add some white back into the sky. Now, there's 3 different kinds of whites that you can get that are paints. The first one is the watercolor Chinese white, and it is not gonna hide things. It'll lighten things a little bit, but it's definitely not gonna hide anything. So if I was to put that in my sky, I'm not gonna get a nice bright white. The other option is called titanium white or permanent white, and it is a gouache. So a gouache is sort of like if you had an acrylic and a watercolor and they got together and they had a baby, the baby would be gouache. So gouache is great because it's actually going to hide things. I use gouache quite a bit when I have lost too much of the white in my painting and I want to go back. However, there is another way that you can add white to your painting, and it's a cheat. You can use correction fluid. So this is basically just a whiteout pen, and it works really, really well. I'm going to use all three in this just so you can see the difference. With the whiteout pen, you really have to shake it well. And I always have to use this on a test sheet first. And so I can get really defined little lines with it. Defined little dots, I should say. They're not perfect though, so you do have to actually spend some time making them perfect. So I've done, I'll do some more after, but those are all on this side of the sky. I've used the permanent or the whiteout. Now you can put titanium white, gouache, permanent white into your palette if you want. I often just use a very fine brush and take it right out of the tube because I'm using so little of it. So on this side, I will do my dots with this. Now, when you need to think a little bit about your composition, odd numbers are always great. So you want to kind of clump things in groups of 3 or 1 or 5. And they don't have to be the same, but you do want some patterns. Now, the other part about this composition that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a pattern and repeat the pattern in the sky because I'm going to make constellations, made up constellations. I will try to put in an Australian oh shoot, I can't remember what it is. It's the big one, Southern Cross, there we go, the Australian Southern Cross. And the other one that I'm definitely going to put in the sky is Orion upside down. When I lived in Canada, I used to always find Orion in the sky, and that would be how I was able to find the North Star, because Orion can lead you to the North Star if you know where it is. And then it truly felt like I was living on the other side of the world. It truly felt like I was actually on the opposite side of the planet when I went out one night to look at the constellations, and there's Orion in the sky and he's upside down. I was just like, oh my goodness me, he's actually upside down. That really made me feel like I was completely, totally on the other side of the world. Now, I also put on some Chinese white just so you can see how subtle the Chinese white is, how it is not going to cover everything up, but this will show you just a little bit of what you can get with Chinese white. The only times I truly use Chinese white is when I am doing, do you see how subtle that is? And that's straight out of the tube. So I haven't watered this down at all. The only time I use Chinese white is when I am doing portraits and I'm making skin tones. So I'm not getting much at all, but it'll be very, very nice and subtle. And you can put it on quite thick, but you're still going to end up with it being completely translucent and transparent at the end. So I'll just leave that so you can dry. And then what I'll have to do is I'll have to go back in there with permanent white or titanium white. Sorry, correctional fluid or permanent white. Now that's all done. The next part is the fun part. And when I say fun, I also mean the messy part. I had a glitter explosion in my art cupboard. I have my glitter in this little Ziploc bag, and I don't know how I managed it, but I managed to put it in my closet without it being zipped. So then when I grabbed it and I tipped it over like this, I got glitter throughout my entire art cupboard, which means every time I pull something out, I end up getting more and more glitter on me. So I'm just going to be the most glittery girl for all of 2017. I was the most glittery girl, and I'm going to be the most glittery girl for all of 2018 as well. This is a blue stick, so it's a glue stick that is blue when it goes on, but it dries clear. So it's really nice. You can see where you've actually put the glue. And I'm just going to do some zigzags on top of all of my trees. Okay, that's it, that's all. And now I'm going to be Miss Glittery. This will be so pretty. So as soon as you add more than one kind of art supply, art materials to a painting, it's called mixed media. So I can no longer call this a watercolor painting, especially if I'm using correction pen. Then I would say watercolor and pen. So with glitter, this is definitely now a mixed media, but I still consider it a watercolor because watercolor is the main thing. Now there's just one more thing I'm going to do while I'm waiting for my little constellations to dry, is I'm going to do the Oh Holy Night. And I did this in the original on a separate sheet of paper, and I stamped the letters. There's so many different ways you can do this. You're the artist, you'd have artistic license, so you choose. You could just write it in the sky, you could stamp it and paste it, cut and paste it. It's your choice. I think I'm just gonna actually write it in the sky this time. But I have to let my constellations dry first. Now I can go in with my correction fluid. This is dangerous though, because I guarantee I'm getting glitter on my wrist by doing this. And so I'm using the permanent white on the right hand side just so you can see how that compares to the correction fluid on the left hand side. And I'm also going to now put some of the permanent white, the gouache, back into the center part because as you can see, the Chinese white, you can't tell that it's been applied there at all. Make sure you stand up, look at your artwork from a few steps back. If it's portable, I would suggest when you think it's done to move to a different room, put it under different light, put it somewhere where you can walk by it 2 or 4 or 6 or 8 times during the day so you can keep looking at it and decide whether you like it. Last touches, I put in the Southern Cross there. I decided not to put in Orion just because my sky was getting a little bit too crowded. Now's the most important thing. You need to date and sign your work. As well, I would suggest that you write on the back what you like, what you didn't like, what worked, what didn't work, what you would do differently. It's really important that you have those sorts of things written down in your art journal so you can go back and go, wow, look at what I was doing in 2017. If you like this video, I would ask that you would please give me the thumbs up, leave me a comment, subscribe to my YouTube channel. I would love to hear from you. Send me some pictures of your version of this so we can compare. That would be awesome. And I wish you all the very, very best for this holiday season.